Settlement of maritime disputes, dialogue or confrontation. Welcome to part 2 of a special 2-part series with me, Liu Xin, on the point, coming to you from the beautiful seaside resort of Sanya in southern China's Hainan province. It's jointly organized by the Huayang Center for Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance, the China Oceanic Development Foundation, the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, Hainan Institute for Free Trade Port Studies, and CGTN. Our distinguished panelists are Wu Shicun, Chairman of the Huayang Research Center for Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance, and Chairman of the Academic Committee at the China National Institute for South China Sea Studies, Philip Saunders, Dean Emeritus and Adjunct Professor of Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University in Canada, O.A. Sun, Principal Advisor at the Pacific Research Center of Malaysia, Navy Captain Suk Jun Yoon, Senior Fellow at the Korea Institute for Military Affairs and a retired Republic of Korea Navy Captain, Yan Yan, Director of the Research Center for Oceans Law and Policy at the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, Romel Balawi, President of the Philippine Society for International Security Studies, and Ambassador Yi Xianliang, Visiting Professor at Chengdu University of Technology and former Ambassador of China to Norway. And we have guests here also who have been following us. Let's give ourselves a warm round of applause as we dive into the second part. So during the first part, each panelist have laid out their opening positions. I'm sure you all have something to say to each other, but we have 7 guests. Where do we start? Mr. Wu, why don't we start from you? Exactly what is the one biggest challenge in maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea, having heard the last 7 guests?
How long
6
is
guests.
it?
How about 2 minutes?
Okay. Big challenges that we are facing in the South China Sea for the peace and stability.
One big challenge, the biggest.
Challenge, one big challenge, or 2 big challenges, okay, or 3. Number 1 is United States is no neutral for its South China Sea policy. United States used to be neutral towards its South China Sea, but now it is not the case. The second one is because the United States would like take the window opportunity to consolidate and expand their vested interests by unilateral actions in dispute areas. Number 3 is the negative impact of the ruling. All of those activities, even FNOPs conducted by the United States, are based on the ruling, or in other words, was endorsed by the ruling. Thank you. Big challenges. 3.
Okay, so the United States, the ruling of 2016 and FNOPs. Professor Saunders, you would like to address that? I mean, as you just said, you have, Canada and the United States have a similar dispute, right, concerning territory. How come you don't have an arbitrary ruling given down to you that you are obliged to accept?
Well, actually, we did have a dispute that went to court. And as an example for this, they would be the habits of trust and cooperation that takes time to build, particularly after litigation. But Canada and the U.S. did go to court, the International Court of Justice, over the boundary, the fishing boundary in particular, in the Gulf of Maine. It was a major political dispute on both sides. But the diplomats in that case had reached a solution. And they put it up, but it couldn't get ratified in the U.S. Senate, as the treaty had to be ratified because of opposition by fishing interests from Massachusetts. So what we did, actually, is they put a sort of a suicide pill in the agreement that if the treaty wasn't ratified, they'd go to court. So they did go to court, but it was done with trust and the agreement of both sides.
Yeah. Just now you mentioned the keyword advanced consent. Right. So in that case, both Canada and the United States had advanced consent.
In that case, they had actual consent because they had done so in the treaty. It didn't require the jurisdiction.
But in the case of the South China Sea ruling, what would...
The jurisdiction in the South China Sea ruling was obtained by the application of the compulsory dispute settlement procedures in the law of the sea treaty. which didn't exist when we went to court, and of course the United States is still not a party. But that is truly advanced consent, because you're consenting to some future arbitration panel deciding whether they have jurisdiction over your dispute, which can be quite risky.
Okay. Well, I guess you were still talking about the China-Canada case. Maybe I go to Ban Lao, our guest from the Philippines. Do you see a difference between the case between, just now Professor Saunders alluded to, and the case between China and the Philippines? Well, the case that Philippines brought to The Hague. Is there a difference in terms of advanced consent?
Well, there is a stark difference because China rejected the whole process and even rejected the whole decision. But I would like to emphasize 3 exemplary cases where parties can really settle peacefully their disputes, and if they cannot settle peacefully their disputes, they can manage their disputes. Like, for example, between the Philippines and Indonesia, we had already a delimitation agreement of our overlapping exclusive economic zone in the Sulu and Celebes Sea, and it took us more than 20 years to negotiate for that. So we can settle disputes. And second, with Sabah, although the issue of Sabah keeps on going on every now and then, the Philippines and Malaysia have existing mechanism to manage their differences very well. Third, with Vietnam, you know, we are also having territorial disputes and maritime jurisdictional conflict with Vietnam. But we also have a mechanism to manage our differences with Vietnam. So the question is, if we can do that with Indonesia, if we can do that with Malaysia, if we can do that with Vietnam, why we can't do that with China? We cannot do that with China because Dr. Wusichan told us, because there is an extra-regional factor, and that is the United States. Thank you.
I was wondering where you were going to point to, but your last question really gave the answer, I believe. Okay, Navy Captain Yoon, you were shaking your head. What were you not agreeing with?
Well, I'm not divert my Philippines colleagues' argument. Rather, I would like to express my personal perspective on South China Sea issues. There are 3 intractable obstacle factors for the cooperation. First, third-party involvement. South Korea has restricted express with regarding to South China Sea issues because we are not part of the South China Sea issues. But since 2023, after the summit between United States and South Korea, we begin to express our concern for the South China Sea issues under the United States Biden administration's heavy pressures. Second, we should not militarize the South China Sea issues. Actually, serving more than 34 years in our Navy, I never heard what is the freedom of navigation operation. It appears to be just inert navigation from one place to other place. But United States say we conducted freedom of navigation in order to make illegal Chinese excessive maritime territorial claim. This is not the right way to do so for the dialogue and cooperation. Third, there are huge disinformation with regarding to Chinese activity, a more aggressive, active, pre-active activity on a South China Sea issue, such as maritime Malaysia. I did participate in our domestic conference in South Korea a couple of weeks ago. We have a big argument. But what is the major role of maritime Malaysia? They have make some more aggressive and physical act against parties, third parties? No, they just present over there. So my argument is, we should carefully deal with some Western media report regarding to South China Sea issues in a daily basis. I'd better stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Ambassador Yi, you wanted to chip in here.
Thank you. I would like to have 3 points to comments or get some clarification about our previous speaks. First is about China and Philippines relations, its relations on South China Sea. You say China and the Philippines had almost 20 years consultation or dialogue. Actually, this is not true. I used to be the Deputy Director General and the Director General of the Department for the Boundary and Ocean Affairs. So I request my counterpart in Manila to have visited, talk about our relations on South China Sea. Unfortunately, just one time, because I declare in Sanya, I did never get any invitation from Philippines. So at that moment, your former president, Ramos, ordered Philippine foreign minister to invite me to pay the visit. And also we invite Philippines side to come to Beijing or any parts of China to exchange views, but we failed. Suddenly, you initiate, the cause to the Hague. I worked in the Hague for 8 years as a legal advisor for the ambassador and also for the embassy. So now, what happened? So I would like to have some clarification with you. The second is about from Captain Yun. 2 points. The first about the military neutrality. As you know, right now we have 151 coastal states in the world. Most of them belong to the semi-enclosed or enclosed sea. Half of them, their enforcement, legal enforcement rely on the Navy, particularly the developing countries. So if you suggest the military neutrality in the legal enforcement, it needs some basis, needs some practice globally. The second, you talk about neutrality on the disputes. I would like to check with you, how about the Korean Navy kept a neutral position on the disputes between Korea and Japan on the Lin-Court locks in the past 2 decades. The third point is about the performance.
Hold your horse, please, Ambassador. Hold your horse.
Yes.
Shall we give the other 2 guests some time, an opportunity to react if they choose to? Mr. Ban Loy, you would like to say something?
Okay.
The unwillingness or the lack of initiative from the Philippine governmental side for the olive branches from the Chinese side.
Yeah, based on that statement, I would like to stress that it takes strong leadership decision to really come out with cooperative arrangement. Like, for example, during the time of former President Rodrigo Duterte, he initiated a strong will to really deal with China and cooperate with China, and we made a breakthrough in 2019. We already decided to establish several working groups for cooperation to occur, like joint fishery management, cooperation in the area of search and rescue operation, and even Coast Guard to Coast Guard cooperation. And the biggest project that they entered into was a memorandum of understanding for the development of natural gas and oil. In other words, yeah, we can cooperate. But of course, there are external interferences and also domestic pressure against that because, you know the nature of our politics in the Philippines. If in China, the government policy is defined and influenced by the Communist Party of China, in the Philippines, our government policy is greatly shaped by the vested interests of our oligarchy. And our ruling oligarchy has a pro-American orientation. And therefore, they're opposed to that kind of arrangement. Because if the Philippines cooperate with China, that's a win for China. That's a win for China and therefore a defeat for the United States and its like-minded allies in the region. But we can cooperate, and that is why I am emphasizing that we have to go back to the achievements of that agreement, that we can cooperate if there is a strong will on the part of the leadership to really cooperate.
Okay. I hope the Filipino leadership will hear this conversation and get your message. And Navy Captain Nguyen, please, would you like to react?
Yes, 2 points. Actually, I had the questions from the excellencies. The first one, yes, militarization in to resolve the maritime boundary issues, especially in the semi-crossed seas. I think that is why South Korea have enhanced our law enforcement capabilities rather than to invest our money on to our naval force, which is we would like to input our naval force in disputed lines, probably, or boundaries. So that is, I think, the way to do so to avoid any militarized over issues. Second, in doctor issues, we want to be state core. With regarding to undisputable dispute with Japan. Am I right? Correct? Yeah, for the second question, doctor issues.
My question for you is about your disputes between you and Japan. The Korean Navy kept neutral position on these disputes in the past 2 decades. If we check with the history, what happened on these islands and what happened between Korea and Japan? Because you suggested neutrality for the military actions, for the enforcement or for any disputes of the oceanic matters, right?
I think we have a clear policy to deal with the dispute issues our neighboring countries, mostly coastal countries. Because Japan is not declared the archipelago state countries. We regard them to still coastal countries. But the problem is, on-scene commanders have a heavy duty or responsibilities to complete his missions as constabulary missions in the naval functions. I think that is the major way to do so, and then that is the major region I brought on my topics. Military neutrality is much important. I've been to Navy, served more than 80 years for the sea duties as a Drobon 40 for my basis as commanding officer. But every time, under the direction from Supreme Command, all responsibilities lie on to my own self. So I got to be more militarized action to deal with the issues in the disputed waters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Yen, you would like to chip in here because you were talking about exclusiveness. It seems that exclusivity is the zeitgeist, is it?
Well, this is exactly what I've been talking about, the control of the waters and the control to compete for jurisdiction over the ocean and in human history. And also what I summarized from the previous discussion between these two speakers is that the key word is political will. With the political will, you can choose either to dealterate the dispute or bilateral relations, or you can choose to enhance maritime cooperation. It's all about political will between China and the Philippines.
Is there an equal amount of political will? Or I understand, as a Chinese, I understand there is a great will from the part of China to respect navigation in accordance with international, to settle disputes peacefully. Is that will shared? If not, why by regional country from your observation, Ian?
Maybe just one point. I think it's pretty clear to us that the political will of President Duterte and President Bongbong Marcos is different. It's like very large difference between two of them. And also, not just the way he treats the dispute between China and the Philippines, but also he treats the dispute between the Philippines and also Malaysia. Like, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, the newly released Maritime Zone Act by the Philippines, well, they also included the Sabah Maritime Zones or disputed with Malaysia into its EEZ, and does receive a protest from Malaysia as well. So this is, well, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think this is what the current president of the Philippines way of dealing the dispute.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Mr. O, you were talking about Asian wisdom, our way of dealing with this. Try to jump out of this, right? The nitty-gritty details. What really is the way to dialogue, not to confrontation? Keep it short, please.
Well, number one, like when Malaysia was protesting about Philippines' enactment of the law, which somehow sort of swept in Sabah, right? Well, at the same time, Philippines was hit by some sort of typhoons, and well, we still send our military assets to assist in the rescue efforts and so on. So that shows you within all these Southeast Asian countries, we could disagree or sometimes agree to disagree, but we still help one another. But I'm also very intrigued by the suggestions of provisional arrangement by Romeo, as well as political will by Ms. Yen. I think we sometimes have to think out of the box. For example, in South China Seas, we could think of, indeed, we have been talking about joint exploitation, joint exploration for quite some time. I think we should put our words to deeds. We should really do it, and perhaps all of us will set up some sort of fund. If we cannot set up such a fund, then we use the Belt and Road initiatives, right? Because all this needs money. When you have a fund, you have money, and you use to sort of use the money to develop some of these littoral countries. I think everybody would feel the benefit, everybody will be thankful, and then the sort of political will, the sort of confidence building mechanism and so on would be set in place. Then you can enter into dialogues, negotiations, and so on, which I mentioned just now here.
Professor Saunders, I'll leave the last remark to Mr. Wu. I'm sure you have a lot of things to say, but Professor Saunders, Mr. O just gave very idealistic prospects for the future, very good solutions, how applicable, and what is the crust of the problem we're looking at, and going forward to the next 4 years, you know?
The possibilities. The next 4 years, I think we're all a little in the dark with the American view. But what I would like to point out is that the types of disputes you're describing and the ones where there is hope for cooperation is a set of disputes among neighbors. The country next door isn't going away. Whereas if you think of the maritime disputes through the 1970s and 80s, Canada, the South Pacific Islands in particular, and others we're dealing with, it was distant water fishing and other predatory activities by countries that had no stake in the region at all, no permanent stake. And what was necessary with them, like Spain at one point, although Spain improved remarkably, What was necessary was enforcement, and pretty strict enforcement.
May I just take this opportunity, because there's a lot of press. If you read the press, China is not respecting international law because of the UNCLOS, because of the arbitral tribunal. It's like black and white. You were talking about ambitious tribunal. Can you expand a little bit on that? 2 sentences, please.
I think there's a broader question beyond the South China Sea about tribunals that take a single dispute that's been brought to them, possibly under difficult jurisdictional settings, and try to make rules for the international community. Not very well. The difficulty in international law is, if you look at the statements of the United Kingdom and the United States after the arbitration, they both were phrased very carefully that we endorse this decision and that we think that both parties should recognize that it is binding upon them. Because it's not binding on the United States, who has island territories throughout the Pacific that exceed the limits, and it is not binding apparently on the United Kingdom, which has drawn baselines around the Falkland Islands. So there's a bit of hypocrisy in these claims about that particular decision, which many states would not consider to be binding on them anyway.
Go into the details. And Mr. Wu.
Okay, thank you. I would talk a little bit more about the South China Sea arbitration ruling, because I guess if we open the floor for discussion, there might be a lot of concerns about the arbitration award. I went to Shalom Bay, Vietnam, to attend this year's 16th International South China Sea Conference. Ambassador Deng and Dr. Ran Xiongsan is here. I was questioned by lots of participants why China didn't participate in the arbitration process, why China doesn't recognize the arbitration ruling. So I would simply to answer this question in this occasion, because the dispute, the problem between China and the Philippines is not about the application, interpretation of UNCLOS. It is about the stubborn disputes. The fact was that the Philippines, since the 1970s, by military actions, occupied illegally 8 South China Sea islands or reefs. So the substantive issue is territorial dispute. It goes beyond UNCLOS. So that's why China didn't participate, and once the arbitration tribunal issued its ruling, didn't recognize the ruling. And another important principle is, Philip, my friend, mentioned state consent. Because the state consent is a necessary prerequisite to any form of dispute settlement. So that's the main reason why China didn't participate and didn't recognize the ruling. Thank you.
We're almost on time. Thank you so much. A warm round of applause to my guests, Mr. Wu Shichun, Professor Philip Saunders, Mr. O.A. Sung, Captain Yu, Ms. Yan Yan, Mr. Romel Ban Laui, and Ambassador Yi Xian Liang. And with that, we come to the end of part 2 of this very special 2-part series on maritime cooperation and dispute settlement. It has been brought to you by the Huayang Center for Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance, the China Oceanic Development Foundation, the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, Hainan Institute for Free Trade Port Studies, and CGTN. I'm Liu Xin, coming to you from Sanya. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing, this time in Sanya. But I'll go back to Beijing, and on behalf of the whole team, thank you so much for watching, and you've got the point.